theme, or you're not from this planet. I'm Michael Feinstein, and this is Songs and Conversations with me. This piece of music is probably the most iconic Broadway melody, but it was written for a motion picture called 42nd Street, which is the name of the Broadway musical that happened many years after the film. The film was produced in 1932 by Warner Brothers, and the Broadway version of 42nd Street opened on the Great White Way in, I think, August of 1980. Do you know who composed that song? Do you know who composed the score of 42nd Street? Well, shortly after the show opened in 1980, I traveled to New York to see it, and I noticed that there was very little mention of the person who composed the music for the show, even in the souvenir program for the show. So I stood in the lobby as people were leaving, having seen one of the great entertainments of that time on Broadway with all these iconic songs in it. And I asked people as they were exiting, do you know the name of the composer of the show? No. Excuse me, do you have any idea who wrote these songs? No, no idea. Not one person knew who wrote the songs for 42nd Street. And that was something that was a lifelong problem for its composer, Harry Warren. Harry Warren was my friend. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, Christmas Eve, 1893, and he died in Los Angeles in 1981. And I got to know him in the last 2 years of his life when he was in his late 80s and I was in my early 20s. And there's a lot to be said about Harry Warren, but I'm going to pretty much confine this to 42nd Street and his early career because I want to do more about my friend. Harry eventually won 3 Academy Awards for writing Lullaby of Broadway, You'll Never Know, and On the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe. He almost always wrote the music until later in his life, and his lyric collaborators for the score of 42nd Street were Al Dubin. Later he worked a lot with Johnny Mercer. He worked with Gus Kahn. He worked with Dorothy Fields, with Ira Gershwin, Leo Robin, and Mac Gordon, who was one of his longtime collaborators. And so Harry was a true musical chameleon. The funny thing about Harry is that he never wanted to go to Hollywood to write film scores. He was very content working in New York on Tin Pan Alley and writing for Broadway reviews, and was incredibly successful. And yet the call of Hollywood was something that he couldn't resist. And by the time that he was asked to write the score for 42nd Street, this is the cover of the logo for the 1980 Broadway musical. But by the time he was asked to write the score for this film, Hollywood musicals were out of favor. They had tanked with the public because they were filmed in a static fashion. The producers and directors and choreographers in Hollywood hadn't figured out the creative ways to use the camera to make musical films interesting. So they would film a musical number static, usually in a wide shot, maybe with a close-up here and there, and nothing ever moved. So people became very bored with these films, with the simple plots, and also with songs that sometimes were not top drawer. And so by the time Harry was asked to work on 42nd Street in Hollywood, it was a big risk for a studio to even write a musical film. Let me show you some of the sheet music from that first iteration of 42nd Street. This pile of music is all songs with music by Harry Warren. So here's the original cover of sheet music for 42nd Street. Very, very handsome, isn't it? The stars were Warner Baxter, B.B. Daniels, George Brent, Ruby Keeler, Ginger Rogers, Dick Powell, Una Merkel, Guy Kibbe. So, that goes in the next stack there. So, Harry Warren, here's a picture of him in 1930. This is a Metronome magazine, and this is right before he had his major Hollywood success. He had become so well known on Tin Pan Alley between 1922, when he wrote his first song, and this issue in 1930, that they put him on the cover of Metronome. His early hits included Rose of the Rio Grande, I Love My Baby Loves Me, Home in Pasadena, I Found $1 Million Baby in a 5 and 10 cent store. That he wrote for a Broadway review called Billy Rose's Crazy Quilt, 1930. Then he wrote for a review called Sweet and Low. In 1931, he wrote the score for The Laugh Parade, which included a big hit for him called You're My Everything. Let's see if we have it here. No. But these were all book songs that prepared Harry for writing the same kinds of book songs for Hollywood musicals. While most songwriters were writing sort of generic songs, Harry had a dramatic sense, and with Al Dubin, who was the most incredible lyricist and one of his favorite collaborators, were able to fashion songs that had dramatic content. These are studio copies of some of the early Warner Brothers songs. This is what the studio copies looked like before they were actually published. They were on these sort of purple mimeographed sheets. These are all things that he wrote in the 1930s for various movies. He wrote for dozens of films at Warner Brothers between 1932 and 1939. Broadway Cinderella, I think this was cut from a movie that starred Jane Froman. He was just so prolific. Here are some song folios of songs by Harry Warren. This is a picture of Harry in the 1940s when this book was printed. So many hits, so many big hits. You'll never know just how much I love you. I Had the Craziest Dream, Serenade in Blue, No Love, No Nothing, I Wish I Knew, My Heart Tells Me, The More I See You, You Wonderful You, Serenade in Blue, I Got a Gal in Kalamazoo, Chattanooga Choo Choo. I mean, the list of songs is incredible. Now, when Harry went to Hollywood in 1932, he was very homesick for Broadway, and he was writing the score of songs. But the first piece of music that he had to create was for a dramatic scene. He wrote a piece of underscore, is what they call it, when you write music that underscores dramatic action without singing. So he wrote this, this piece of music that turned out to be the first piece of music that he heard played by a large Hollywood orchestra. He had heard his songs played by many dance bands and heard his songs played by Broadway pit bands, but he had never heard any of his compositions played by a 50-piece orchestra. So when they started to play this piece of music, he was so overwhelmed by it that he started to cry, and it went like this. Piece of music was also in 42nd Street. I'm disappointed that they didn't use it in the Broadway musical because it could very easily have had a lyric fitted to it. Another piece of music that he wrote for 42nd Street was this rehearsal piano thing that was used in the Broadway show as well. Pretty Lady, which was the name of the fictitious show in the score of 42nd Street. So 42nd Street was such a big hit in 1932 that they extended Harry Warren's contract, and he ended up staying in Hollywood for the rest of his career. He wrote score after score after score, and he kept talking about going back to New York, but he never made it back there. And he always wanted to go back to New York because he wanted to write another Broadway musical, which he succeeded in doing in the 1950s when he wrote a thing called Shangri-La, which was a musical version of Lost Horizon, and unfortunately a colossal flop, not helped by the fact that there was a newspaper strike and the air conditioning in the theater went out. It was just one problem after another. So Harry always felt disappointed that he didn't have another Broadway success. And then David Merrick comes along in the late 1970s, and he calls Harry Warren, and he says, "I'd like to have lunch with you. I'd like to discuss turning 42nd Street into a Broadway musical." So he meets Harry Warren at the Polo Lounge, and they sit down, and David said, "So, what do I have to do to get the rights to turn 42nd Street into a stage musical?" And Harry said, "Well, I don't own any of the rights because the songs were all written for Warner Brothers for hire, and they own the copyright, they own the whole thing." So David Merrick said, "Thank you very much." He got up and he left without buying Harry Warren lunch. So that was the beginning and the end of Harry Warren's relationship with David Merrick. David Merrick then negotiated with Warner Brothers to obtain the right to take the songs from 42nd Street and other Harry Warren motion pictures and turn them into this Broadway musical. He financed the thing entirely on his own, and he made a deal that gave him the rights to the songs at a very, very low royalty, and Harry Warren got hardly any money. And he was so hurt by the fact that he felt Merrick was purposefully pushing him out of the picture so it would be known as David Merrick's 42nd Street. And indeed, on the cover of the record album and on the souvenir program, you don't see Harry Warren's name anywhere. Here on this folio you do, but everything else is David Merrick's 42nd Street. And Harry was quite hurt by that. He did not attend the opening of the show in New York because he had no desire to see David Merrick get all of the glory, as well as Gower Champion. Incidentally, Gower Champion, he said, was very nice to him and would call him from the road and tell him what was going on, or Gower's assistant would. But as much as Harry wanted the musical to be a success, he was always disappointed that it was something for which he was not properly acknowledged. So I went to New York, and I saw the musical, and I called him and told him all about it, and he was thrilled that it was as good as everybody said that it was. But he died brokenhearted. He was a man who was very, very successful financially and had practically everything that anyone could want, but he was deeply disappointed that he died with very few people knowing who he was. The song that I'd like to sing for you is that melody I played for you before. That was that instrumental scoring for the movie of 42nd Street. About 10 years after Harry Warren's passing, a brilliant songwriter named Murray Grand got permission from Harry Warren's estate to write a lyric for that tune, and he called it "One Love in My Life." So in remembrance of my friend Harry Warren, here it is. There's one love in my life, and that love is you. You're my love, you're my life. No one else will do. I can never forget from the moment we met. My most wonderful dream started coming true. You're the heart of my life, what I've waited for. You're my reason to live, and more. You're all that I desire, my desire, my partner and my friend, the one love in my life.